Welcome back to Hearts Wine from Harsh Distractions, where we don't shy away from the messy parts of love. We lean into them because relationships are not just about the highlight reels. They're about the moments that challenge you, stretch you, and sometimes force you to look at parts of yourself you'd rather avoid. And today, we're getting into one of those conversations that people feel but don't always know how to say out loud. So, whether you're the one saying, I'm not in the mood, or you're the one hearing it more than you like, I want you to stay open during this conversation. Not defensive, not dismissive, just open. Because what we're about to unpack might help you understand not just your partner better, but yourself too. And trust me, once you see it differently, you can't unsee it. So I'm your host, Alicia Minor Gaines, your wonderful, yes, podcaster, but also your licensed marriage and family therapist, relationship coach, author, poet, relationship columnist, a mother, a wife, and so much more. So, can I be honest with y'all? Some of the biggest fights happening in relationships right now aren't about cheating, money, or even communication. They're happening over one simple sentence: I'm not in the mood. And I know some of y'all just shifted in your seat because you've either said it or you've heard it, and it didn't land softly. It never does, if we're going to be honest. Because what sounds like a small moment on the surface can feel like a deep emotional rejection underneath. And that's where things start to spiral. Now, here's the part people don't talk about enough. Most couples aren't actually arguing about sex. They're arguing about what sex represents: feeling desired, feeling chosen, feeling connected. And when that connection feels inconsistent or missing, it hits something deeper than just physical intimacy. It taps into insecurity, vulnerability, and sometimes even past wounds that had nothing to do with your current partner. So now, what should have been a simple not tonight turns into tension, distance, and sometimes even resentment. And let me say this clearly: this conversation is not about blaming the person who isn't in the mood, because sometimes you're just simply tired. Sometimes you're overwhelmed. Sometimes your body is present and your mind is somewhere else entirely. And that's real. But it's also not about dismissing the person who is in the mood either, because their desire isn't just physical, it's emotional. It's their way of reaching for connection, closeness, and reassurance. So now you've got two people, both valid, both human, but completely missing each other. That's why this episode matters. Because if we keep treating this like a surface level issue, we're going to keep having the same arguments over and over again. Same frustration, different day. And eventually, it stops being about intimacy altogether and starts becoming about avoidance, distance, silence, and let's be real, some of y'all aren't even arguing anymore. Y'all just quietly adjusted to the disconnection. And that right there, that's even more dangerous. So let's sit in this for a second, shall we? Because sexual rejection is one of those experiences people try to act tough about, but it hits deeper than most are willing to admit. We laugh it off, we say it's cool, we roll over and grab our phones like it didn't even bother us. But internally, something shifts. And it's not just about being turned down in the moment, it's about what that moment starts to mean over time. Because one no might be understandable, but repeated no's begin to tell a story in your mind, whether that story is true or not. And here's where it gets real. According to research in marriage and family therapy, rejection doesn't just feel emotional. It actually activates the same parts of the brain associated with physical pain. So when your partner turns you down, your body isn't just processing it as a casual moment, it's registering it as hurt. That's why it lingers. That's why it stays with you longer than you expected. That's why later on, you might find yourself pulling away, overthinking, or even hesitating to initiate again. Because now it's not just about desire, it's about risk. It's about putting yourself out there and wondering, am I about to get rejected again? And nobody likes to feel like they're begging to be wanted. Nobody wants to feel like they're the only one reaching. the only one initiating, the only one trying to create that connection. So, what happens? I'm so glad y'all asked. You start protecting yourself. You stop asking. You stop trying. And on the outside, it looks like distance, but on the inside, it started as hurt. Let me give you a real life picture of how this plays out, shall I? Imagine a couple. Let's call them Taylor and Morgan. Taylor initiates intimacy, not aggressively, not selfishly, just wanting to feel close. And Morgan responds with, I'm tired tonight. Cool, that happens. But then the next night comes and the same response happens. A few days later, same response. And now Taylor isn't just hearing, I'm tired. Taylor is hearing, you're not a priority. I don't desire you. I'm not interested. Even if Morgan doesn't mean any of that at all. And that's the disconnect right there. Because Morgan might genuinely be exhausted, overwhelmed, or mentally drained, but Taylor is internalizing it as rejection. And if that gap isn't addressed, it starts to create a silent tension. Conversations become shorter, touch becomes less frequent, eye contact starts to fade, and before you know it, the issue isn't just happening in the bedroom, it's showing up everywhere in the relationship. And here's the part that really gets people. Sometimes the partner who is being rejected starts to question themselves in ways they didn't expect, such as, do I look different? Have I let myself go? Are they attracted to someone else? Are they even attracted to me? And even if those thoughts aren't rooted in reality, they feel real. Because rejection doesn't just hit your body, it hits your identity. It makes you question your desirability, your worth, your place in the relationship. But let's flip it for a moment. Because the person doing the rejecting is often misunderstood too. They're not always trying to hurt their partner. Sometimes they're dealing with stress, burnout, hormonal changes, emotional disconnection, or even their own insecurities. Sometimes they feel pressure, and pressure is the quietest way to shut desire down. So now they're avoiding intimacy not because they don't care, but because they feel overwhelmed by the expectation of it. And this is where couples start missing each other completely. One partner is thinking, why don't they want me? While the other is thinking, why do I feel so pressured? And neither one is wrong, but neither one is fully understanding the other either. So instead of addressing the real issue, they both retreat into their own corners, holding on to their own interpretations of the situation. So when we talk about sexual rejection, we have to stop treating it like a simple yes or no situation. It's layered, it's emotional, it's psychological. And if we don't unpack what's underneath it, we're going to keep reacting to the surface while the real issue continues to grow underneath. Follow me, y'all. Now, let's get into the part that a lot of couples experience but don't always know how to talk about, which is mismatched libidos. Yep, I'm going there today, y'all. And I want to start this off by saying something that might free somebody listening right now. There is nothing wrong with you for wanting sex more, and there is nothing wrong with you for wanting it less. The problem isn't the difference, it's the meaning we attach to that difference. Because once we start making it personal, that's when things get complicated. See, one partner might view sex as a primary way to feel connected, loved, and reassured. It's how they bond, it's how they release stress, it's how they feel close. Meanwhile, the other partner might need to feel emotionally safe, mentally relaxed, and physically at ease before they even think about intimacy. So now you've got two people speaking two completely different emotional languages, but expecting to meet in the same place at the same time. And what happens next? Labels. Woo, we love labels in relationships, don't we? That sound like you're too needy. You're never in the mood. All you care about is sex. You don't care about me. And just like that, the issue shifts from understanding each other to defending yourself. Now, it's not about connection anymore. It's about protecting your feelings and proving your point. And that right there is how intimacy starts turning into tension. But let's go deeper because libido is not just about physical desire. It's influenced by so many factors that people don't always consider. Stress, that'll shut things down real quick. Anxiety, same thing. Hormonal changes, medications, body image, past trauma, relationship conflict, every single one of those can impact how someone shows up sexually. So when someone says, I'm not in the mood, it might not have anything to do with you. But if that's not communicated, it feels like it does. Let me give you a quick scenario. You've got a couple, we're going to call them Chris and Devin. Chris has a higher libido and feels most connected through physical intimacy. Devin, on the other hand, has been overwhelmed with work, mentally drained, and honestly, just trying to get through the day. By the time Devin gets into bed, intimacy feels like another task on a never ending list. But Chris isn't seeing the stress. Chris is feeling the distance. So now Chris starts initiating more, trying to close the gap. But Devin feels that as pressure, not connection. And now we've got a cycle. The more Chris reaches, the more Devin pulls away. The more Devin pulls away, the more Chris feels rejected. And the more rejected Chris feels, the more intense the need for connection becomes. It's like both people are trying to meet their needs, but in ways that push the other person further away. And if nobody interrupts that cycle with communication and understanding, well, it just keeps repeating. And I need to say this, especially for couples who've been together for a while, your libido is not static, it changes over time. Life happens, bodies change, responsibilities increase. What worked in the beginning of your relationship might not work now. And that doesn't mean the relationship is broken. It just means it needs to be relearned. But a lot of couples don't take the time to relearn each other. They just keep expecting things to feel the same as they did in the honeymoon phase. And let's all normalize this across all types of relationships. This is not just a straight couple issue. This happens in LGBTQ plus relationships, long term partnerships, marriages, dating situations, everywhere. Because at the core of it, it's not about gender. It's about human needs, emotional connection, and how each experience intimacy differently. So if you're in a relationship where libidos don't match, I don't want you to immediately see that as a problem. I want you to see it as something that needs to be understood. Because the goal isn't to be identical. The goal is to learn how to meet each other in a way that feels safe, fulfilling, and respectful for both people. And that requires something a lot deeper than just trying to fix the frequency. It requires understanding the why behind it. All right. Now, let's unpack the sentence itself because I'm not in the mood is one of the most misunderstood phrases in relationships. On the surface, it sounds simple, direct, and harmless. But underneath, woof, that sentence is layered. It's carrying emotions, stress, experiences, and sometimes even unspoken pain. And the problem is, most couples only respond to what's said, not what's actually being felt. Because let's be real, rarely is someone just sitting there thinking, I don't want my partner. Most of the time, it's deeper than that. Sometimes I'm not in the mood really means I'm mentally exhausted. Like life has been lifing all day and I don't have anything left to give right now. Sometimes it means we haven't connected emotionally and I can't just jump into physical intimacy like everything is fine. And let's be honest, for a lot of people, especially those who need emotional safety first, notice I didn't say only women, right? Because there are some men out there that need it too. Intimacy doesn't start in the bedroom. It starts in the conversations, the tone, the energy throughout the day. And then there are, the moments where it's even more internal. I don't feel good about my body right now. I don't feel attractive. I don't feel like myself. And those are the ones people don't always say out loud. Instead, they default to, I'm not in the mood because it feels safer than being vulnerable. It feels easier than explaining something they might not even fully understand themselves. But here's where things start to break down. The partner hearing that sentence doesn't hear all those layers. They don't hear the exhaustion, the insecurity, the emotional disconnect. They hear rejection, plain and simple. So now instead of responding with curiosity, they respond with hurt. And instead of opening up more, the person who said it shuts down even further. And just like that, the distance between them grows. Let me give you a real life moment that might sound familiar. You've got a couple, we're going to call them Sam and Riley. Sam has been trying to connect all week, initiating small moments, dropping hints, trying to create that closeness. And Riley responds with, I'm not in the mood. Now, Sam feels shut down, so Sam pulls back emotionally. But Riley was actually hoping for emotional closeness first, such as conversation, affection, and reassurance, but didn't know how to ask for it directly. So now both of them are sitting there feeling disconnected for completely different reasons. And this is where a lot of couples miss the opportunity to understand each other. Because instead of asking what's behind that, we react to the surface. We take it personally, we internalize it, we build a story around it, and that story starts shaping how we show up moving forward. Less initiating, less vulnerability, less effort, not because we don't care, but because we're trying to protect ourselves. And I want to pause right here if I can and say something that might challenge some perspectives. Not being in the mood is not the problem. Avoiding the conversation about why is the problem. Because if your partner doesn't understand what's going on with you, they're going to fill in the blanks themselves. And most of the time, those assumptions are not kind. They're rooted in fear, insecurity, or past experiences. So the next time that sentence comes up, instead of letting it be the end of the conversation, let it be the beginning. Because there's always something underneath it, always. Now, let's take this a little deeper, shall we? Because a lot of what we're experiencing in our relationships today didn't just start with us. It was taught, modeled, or inherited. And when it comes to sex, intimacy, and emotional expression, generational patterns play a bigger role than most people realize. The way you understand desire, the way you respond to rejection, even the way you communicate your needs, it's all been shaped by what you saw growing up or what you didn't see. Think about it for a second. Some of us were raised in environments where sex wasn't talked about at all. It was either taboo, shameful, or something that only existed behind closed doors with no explanation. So now, as adults, we're expected to communicate openly about intimacy, but we were never given the language to do it. We were taught how to avoid the conversation, not how to have it. So when something feels off, instead of expressing it, we default to silence or short responses like, I'm not in the mood, because that's the safest way we know how to create space. And then you've got others who grew up seeing relationships where intimacy was treated like an obligation. Maybe one partner felt like it was their duty to provide sex, regardless of how they felt. So now in adulthood, there's this internal conflict, wanting autonomy over your body but also feeling guilty for saying no. And that guilt, it can show up as avoidance, disconnection, or even resentment. Because you're not just responding to your partner, you're responding to years of conditioning. There's also a generational shift happening right now that's worth paying attention to, y'all. Older generations often viewed sex as something tied to commitment and routine, something that just happened in relationships. But now, especially with us millennials and Gen Zs, there's a stronger emphasis on emotional connection, mental health, and personal boundaries. People are more aware of their needs, but not always more skilled at communicating them. So now we've got this mix of awareness and confusion, and relationships are feeling the impact. Let me give you a quick example, shall we? We got this couple, we're going to call them Avery and Jordan. Avery grew up in a household where emotions weren't expressed openly, so vulnerability feels uncomfortable. Jordan, on the other hand, grew up in an environment where communication was encouraged. So they need verbal reassurance and emotional connection to feel close. When intimacy comes up, Jordan wants to talk about it process it, and understand it. Well, Avery, on the other hand, shuts down and defaults to, I'm not in the mood. Not because Avery doesn't care, but because Avery doesn't know how to articulate what's actually going on. And this is how generational patterns quietly show up in our relationships, not in obvious ways, but in subtle behaviors, reactions, and communication gaps. The way we avoid, the way we pursue, the way we interpret rejection, it's all connected to what we were taught directly or indirectly. And here's the thing, you don't have to stay stuck in these patterns, but you do have to become aware of them. Because once you understand where your responses are coming from, you can start choosing differently. You can start communicating differently. You can start creating a relationship that isn't just a reflection of your past, but an intentional experience of your present. So when you find yourself in those moments of disconnect, I want you to ask yourself, is this about what's happening right now? Or is this connected to something I learned a long time ago? Because that question alone, it can shift everything. All right. Now, we need to talk about, the part people don't always want to face, the red flags. Because there's a difference between occasionally not being in the mood and a consistent pattern that signals something deeper going on in a relationship. And if we're being honest, because y'all know I like to be honest, as well as controversial, a lot of couples stay stuck because they normalize patterns that actually need to be addressed. They brush it off, laugh it off, or avoid it altogether until it starts affecting everything else. One of the biggest red flags is consistent avoidance with no conversation. Not just, I'm not in the mood, but I'm not in the mood with no follow up, no explanation, no effort to reconnect later. Because intimacy isn't just about the moment. It's about how you repair after the moment. If there's no repair, no check in, no, hey, I know I've been distant, let's talk about it, then that distance starts to feel intentional, even if it's not. Another red flag? Well, when sex becomes a tool instead of a connection. And let's be real, this one might make some people uncomfortable, but it needs to be said, and y'all know I'm gonna say it. If intimacy is being used as a reward, a punishment, or a form of control, that's not healthy. Withholding sex to prove a point or only engaging when you want something in return shifts the dynamic from connection to transaction. And once intimacy becomes transactional, it loses its safety. And without safety, there is no real vulnerability. How many of y'all just rolled your eyes at me for that one? I know. It's okay. Because we're going to keep going. Because then there's the quiet buildup of resentment. This one is sneaky because it doesn't always show up as arguments. Sometimes it shows up as sarcasm, distance, or a lack of effort. It's the I'm tired too, but I still show up mindset. It's the internal scorekeeping. It's the feeling of, why should I keep trying if I keep getting shut down? And once resentment settles in, even small moments can feel heavy because now you're not just responding to what's happening, you're reacting to everything that's been building up over time. Another major red flag? When intimacy gets replaced by distractions. And listen, we're all guilty of this at some point, including myself. Scrolling on your phone, binge watching shows, staying busy, occupying yourself with work, anything that allows you to avoid being present. But when that becomes the default instead of the exception, it creates emotional distance because it's easier to disconnect through distractions than it is to face what's actually going on between you and your partner. And I want to highlight something important here. If one partner feels like they can't even express their desire or their frustration without being dismissed, criticized, or shut down, that's not just a mismatch. That's a communication breakdown because both partners should feel safe expressing their needs, even if those needs don't always align perfectly. Safety doesn't mean agreement, it means being heard without being judged. Let me paint y'all a picture real quick. So we got this couple. We're going to call them Nia and Marcus. Nia has been feeling disconnected for months, but hasn't fully expressed it to Marcus. Marcus keeps initiating, getting turned down, and slowly starts pulling away. But instead of talking about it, Marcus starts spending more time on his phone at night, and Nia assumes he's no longer interested. So now both of them are creating distance based on assumptions instead of conversations. See where I went with that? And now that's how these red flags grow. Not overnight, but over time. Small moments, repeated patterns, unspoken feelings, all stacking on top of each other until the relationship feels heavier than it used to. And the truth is, by the time couples finally address it, they're not just dealing with the current issue, they're unpacking everything that's been building underneath it. So if you're listening and something feels familiar, I don't want you to panic. I want you to pay attention because red flags aren't always a sign to walk away. Sometimes they're a sign that something needs to be worked on, but you can't fix what you're not willing to acknowledge. All right. So now that we've unpacked the tension, the patterns, the red flags, let's talk about what actually helps because awareness is powerful. But if it doesn't lead to change, then we're just sitting and understanding without doing anything different. And relationships don't heal just because you know what's wrong. They heal because you're willing to do something about it. The first thing we have to shift is how we communicate around intimacy. And I'm not talking about those heated, frustrated conversations that happen in the middle of rejection. I'm talking about calm, intentional, honest conversations that happen outside of the moment. Because when you only talk about intimacy when emotions are high, it turns into blame instead of understanding. But when you create space to talk about it openly, you give your partner the opportunity to actually hear you, not defend themselves against you. Instead of saying, "You never want me," which immediately puts your partner on the defensive side, try something like, "When we don't connect physically, I start to feel distant from you. And I want to understand how we can meet each other in a way that feels good for both of us." Do you hear the difference? One creates conflict, the other invites connection. One shuts the conversation down, the other opens it up. And for the partner who is often saying, "I'm not in the mood," this is your moment to lean into vulnerability because your partner can't understand what you don't express. Saying, "I'm overwhelmed," or "I need more emotional connection before physical intimacy," or even "I don't feel like myself lately," gives context to your response. It turns rejection into understanding. And that one shift alone can change how your partner receives what you're saying. Now, let's talk about rebuilding intimacy outside of sex. Because this is where a lot of couples miss the foundation. Intimacy is not just physical, it's emotional, mental, and even energetic. It's the way you talk to each other, the way you check in, the way you show up in small moments, holding hands, hugging, sitting close, laughing together. Those things matter more than people realize. Because when emotional intimacy is strong, physical intimacy doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like a natural extension of connection. And I know some of y'all might not like this one, but we need to talk about it anyway. Scheduling intimacy. Whew, I know. It doesn't sound sexy. It sounds forced. It sounds like another task. But hear me out. Life is busy. Responsibilities are real. And if you don't intentionally make time for connection, everything else will take priority over your relationship. Scheduling intimacy isn't about forcing a moment. It's about prioritizing each other. And sometimes that structure actually creates the space for a spontaneity to come back. So in Latin terms, that means if you schedule it now and get into the routine, make it a pattern, then it's going to happen authentically later. You're going to spontaneously connect later. Got it? Okay. Another solution: stop focusing only on frequency and start focusing on quality. Because you can have frequent intimacy and still feel disconnected if the emotional piece is missing. But when there's presence, intention, and mutual desire, even less frequent moments can feel deeply fulfilling. It's not about keeping score. It's about feeling connected when it happens. And let's not ignore this. Sometimes the help you need is outside of the relationship. You know, therapy, coaching, even guided conversations can help couples unpack things they don't know how to navigate on their own. There's no shame in needing support. In fact, it's one of the strongest things you can do for your relationship. Because sometimes you're not just working through current issues, you're unlearning patterns, healing past wounds, and building something healthier together. Let me bring this to real life, shall we? You got this couple. We're going to call them Danielle and Chris. Danielle has been feeling overwhelmed and disconnected, while Chris has been feeling rejected and frustrated. Instead of continuing the cycle, they sit down and have an honest conversation. Danielle expresses that she needs more emotional presence, more check-ins, more support throughout the day. Chris shares that physical intimacy helps him feel connected and reassured. And instead of arguing about who's right, they start working together to meet each other halfway. Small changes that look like more intentional time together, more open communication, slowly the tension starts to shift just because they do these simple things. Because that's what this is really about. It's not about choosing one person's needs over the other. It's about learning how to hold space for both. It's about understanding that you're not on opposite sides. You're on the same team, trying to figure out how to love each other better. And I want to leave this segment with something important. Reconnection doesn't happen overnight. It takes consistency, patience, and effort from both people. But if the foundation is still there, if the love is still there, then it's absolutely possible to rebuild what feels disconnected right now. Can I share a story with you? Because sometimes it's easier to understand this when you see how it plays out in real life. There's a couple. We're going to call them Maya and Andre. From the outside, everything looked fine. They were together for years, built a life together, handled responsibilities. But behind closed doors, something was off. Andre started feeling like Maya was constantly rejecting him. Every time he tried to initiate intimacy, she would say she was tired, stressed, or just not in the mood. And at first, he understood. Life gets busy. But over time, that understanding turned into frustration. And that frustration turned into distance. Andre stopped initiating as much. He became quieter, less affectionate. Meanwhile, Maya noticed the shift but didn't know how to address it. She thought maybe he's just pulling away, not realizing that he was actually responding how he had been feeling for months. And this is where it gets important. Maya's lack of desire wasn't about Andre at all. It was about her feeling emotionally disconnected, overwhelmed with responsibilities, and honestly unseen in other areas of the relationship. But neither of them said that out loud. So they kept going, coexisting more than connecting. Until one day, the tension finally came to the surface. And instead of arguing, something different happened. They actually talked, not defensively, not to win, but to understand one another. Andre shared how the repeated rejection made him feel unwanted and distant. Maya opened up about how she had been feeling emotionally drained and unsupported, and how that impacted her desire. And in that moment, everything shifted because they realized the issue was never just about sex. It was about connection, communication, and unmet emotional needs. So instead of focusing on how often they were being intimate, they started focusing on how they were showing up for each other daily. More conversations, more presence, more intentional time together, and slowly intimacy stopped feeling like pressure and started feeling natural again. And I shared that story because I want you to see this clearly. Sometimes what looks like rejection is actually a signal that something deeper needs attention. When couples are willing to look beyond the surface and address what's underneath, that's when real change happens. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this entire conversation, it's this. It was never just about sex. It was about connection. It was about feeling seen, desired, prioritized, and emotionally safe with your partner. And when those things start to feel inconsistent, the tension shows up in the most visible place, which is intimacy. But intimacy is just the symptom, not always the root. Because think about it. How many arguments have started with, "You're never in the mood," but were really about feeling unappreciated or feeling overwhelmed or feeling like you're carrying more than your partner sees? And on the other side, how many times has someone felt rejected physically, but what they were really craving was reassurance, closeness, that feeling of being wanted by the person they love? That's the part we don't always say out loud, but it's the part that matters the most. And here's the truth: love requires maintenance, not just in the big moments, but in the everyday ones. The conversations, the check ins, the small gestures, the effort to understand each other, even when it's uncomfortable. Because relationships don't fall apart overnight, they slowly drift when the things that once connected you stop being prioritized. And if we're not intentional, distance can start to feel normal. But the beautiful part is this: if disconnection can be created over time, then so can reconnection. You can rebuild. You can relearn each other. You can create new patterns that feel healthier, safer, and more aligned with who you both are now, not who you were at the beginning. But it takes honesty, it takes vulnerability, and most importantly, it takes both people being willing to lean in instead of pulling away. So the next time you find yourself in that moment, whether you're the one saying, "I'm not in the mood," or the one hearing it, I want you to pause before reacting. Take a breath and ask yourself, what's really being said here? Because when you start responding to the deeper message instead of the surface level moment, everything changes. The conversation changes, the connection changes, and guess what else changes? The relationship. And listen, this is not about being perfect. It's not about always getting it right. It's about being aware, being intentional, and being willing to grow together. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't just to stay together, it's to feel connected while you're together. So if this episode spoke to you, challenged you, or even made you a little uncomfortable, good. That means there's something here worth exploring, something worth talking about, something worth healing. And if you believe that to be true, go visit my YouTube channel at Hearts Wine from Hearts Distractions. Go and visit my website, www.aliciasdistractions.com. Go and purchase my poetry book, Distractions of the Heart, on Amazon. And of course, follow me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook through Hearts Wine Podcast. This has been Hearts Wine from Hearts Distractions, where we don't avoid the hard conversations. We face them, and definitely face them together. I want you all to be able to protect your peace, nurture your love, and don't ignore what your relationship is trying to teach you. Cheers.